Protection Against Domestic Violence Act Rules of 2015 was launched under the Ministry of Gender and Affirmative Action and She Leads Consortium in Nairobi. Present at the launch were Minister for Public Service and Gender Affirmative Action, Aisha Jumwa, Labour Cabinet Secretary Florence Bore, and Nairobi Women Representative Esther Passaris, among other notable officials in state departments. Cabinet Secretary Aisha Jumwa, who has been very vocal about gender-based violence, affirmed the zero tolerance to gender-based violence among the deliverables of the Kenya Kwanza regime. Tracy Ocheng has more on the same.
The Protection Against Domestic Violence Act 2015 is a comprehensive legislation that offers protection and relief for especially girls and women as victims of gender-based violence. According to a report issued at the PADV Act Rules launch, 8 out of 10 women are victims of physical abuse.
It is sad when you have such an event and you ask people whether they are aware whether these rules exist, and they don't know. Since they were gazetted in 2020, I practice in court. You will find me in court in Githunguri. At that time, I will be a different person from who I am today. And I can tell you that I have only received 2 applications under those rules since 2020.
The act, launched by Minister for Gender and Affirmative Action, Aisha Jumwa, has expanded the attitude and manner of defining gender-based violence cases, outlining the process for obtaining protection orders.
These orders will prohibit the perpetrator from further acts of violence, safeguarding the safety and security of the survivor and any children involved.
The CS, in a light moment of personal reflection, narrated the importance of the act while also expressing concern about many others who weren't aware of the Domestic Violence Rules Act.
It's something that I do not want to narrate every time, because if you want a wound to heal, you have to stop scratching it. And I hate to narrate my story, but I'm trying to imagine that if we had the law in place, and from my village in Takaungu, no one knew that I had a right when my rights were violated, that I had a right to report.
The simplified version of the act describes a domestic relationship and examples of abuse, where the former entails and is not exclusive to people who are married or were married, but also people who live in the same house, family members, people who are engaged or were engaged, people who have a child together or have a close personal relationship with that person. Physical abuse, economic abuse, which entails denying money that another person is entitled to, or opportunity to get employment, and emotional or verbal psychological abuse were listed as forms of abuse in the Act. Children were also not left behind in the conversation, with CS Labour and Social Protection Florence Bore and Magdalene Moki of Terres de Oms advocating the need to protect children against violence. CS Bore gave reference to the Violence Against Children report of 2019 that illustrated that 2/3 of young people aged between 18 to 24 years experienced childhood violence.
Of the females aged between 18 to 24 years, and more than half of the males experienced childhood violence. And among them, 15.6% of the females also experience childhood violence. That tells us nearly 2/3 experience multiple violence, such as sexual, beating, and a lot of it.
Magdalene Mwoki of Terrace de Homes noted that both genders are at risk of exploitation, with girls and women being handed the short end of the stick. But she, however, acknowledged how social norms obstruct boys and men from reporting exploitation and violence.
So we target both boys and girls, and we are saying both genders are at risk of exploitation. Of course, we know girls are more at risk, but then we work through schools. We have engaged with child rights clubs. These are clubs that bring together both girls and boys to create awareness on their rights. Because many times we think it's only girls who are exploited, but boys are coming out. The only thing we are seeing in communities is that boys are not openly coming out, and communities are also not quick to report when boys are exploited. You know, in those communities, you're supposed to be a man, you're supposed to be a boy.
In an exclusive interview with GBS TV Africa, CS Aisha Jumwa explained and reiterated that the act covers both men and women, encouraging men to also step up and speak up on gender-based violence.
I don't want to go to the nitty-gritties of how men behave. But to be honest, hii sheria nimesema is not discriminatory. It is for all. Mwanaume akidhulumiwa, hii sheria inamlinda, na mwanamke vile vile akidhulumiwa, hii sheria inamlinda. So it is up to the men. Watoke waongee kama vile wanawake wanavyofanya. Lakini unajua, I think it's nature sometimes. Inawafanya wanajihisi ya kwamba they will look weak. Wakisema mimi nimedhulumiwa kama mwanaume. Lakini hii sheria inawatia nguvu, inawapa nguvu ya kwamba waongee, wachukue hatua zinazohitajika.
Among the beneficiaries of the She Leads program was Malkia Mutuki and Nyambura Kanyi, who run female-based organizations championing for women's rights.
But we forget that our girls in the university, or even generally all tertiary institutions, are beginning to coexist with their boyfriends. There is also the young moms, girls who get children within the university setup, and they don't know, they're not aware that these rules or this protection against domestic violence also caters for them.
Let's take up space. Let's take up space. Space is there for us, and if it isn't there, we need to push for more spaces for ourselves.
And as the Cabinet Secretary, Public Service, Gender and Affirmative Action, I am on the forefront.
Tracy Ochieng reporting for GBS News.